friends, and welcome back to the Rewind podcast of Forward Church. Join us each week as we take a look back on Sunday's message and dig a little deeper into the conversations with those who are teaching across our sites at Forward. We want to invite you to be part of the conversation too. So if something we're talking about on Sunday morning sparks a question in you, head to our website, forwardchurch.ca/ask us, and submit your questions there. And we're going to do our best to engage with those questions in this space. With that said, let's jump in and get started.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Rewind podcast. Really excited for today. On the podcast today, we have Pastor Derek here and
Hello.
Pastor Andrew.
What up?
All right, well guys, this
Derek.
weekend something happened.
Yep.
A little game called the Super Bowl. So let's jump into it there.
Okay.
Did you guys end up watching the Super Bowl? Any thoughts on it?
Was really boring.
Really
It was a
boring.
very boring game. I mean, I guess if you're an Eagles fan, it was super exciting. If you didn't have a team you were cheering for or against, and you were just watching the game for the game, pretty boring.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not a football person by any measure. I had no real rooting interest of any kind, but I had some chicken wings.
Okay.
And that was wonderful.
Andrew, imagine you were watching a Stanley Cup final game, and the final score of that game was 7-1. Just not interesting.
Unless you were cheering for the
Unless
team.
you're cheering for the team, right?
Right.
Or cheering against
Right.
the team
Right.
that got the one goal.
Right.
And you're like
That's-
very excited too.
That's what I feel like. A lot of the conversation online was just a lot of cheering against. A lot of
Yeah.
people.
We hate dynasties.
rooting.
I like a
Rooting
dynasty, but I mean, I like dominance and greatness, but mostly only if it's my team.
There you go.
You just want your team to be great.
Like honestly, if in some imaginary world that definitely does not exist, the Cowboys had been in that game and they had won like 52-3, I'd be like, it's the greatest game ever. I mean, just keep on piling on them. Just keep
Yeah.
on punching them in the face. I
Yeah.
love it. Just
Foot on the throat, baby.
dominate
Yeah.
them the whole way.
All right, there you go. Well, yeah, I was thinking of that. Like, what teams would you want to see just completely dominate or just flat out just lose like we saw on the weekend?
I'd like to watch the Bills lose another heartbreaker. Just
I
to
thought
see
about making that
just
joke,
to see
but
if
you're-
Kirk and Nate's hearts
They can't take
could
it. What?
handle it.
As a Cowboys fan, how can you be like this? I just don't even understand. You've been in that spot.
But no, like
Misery loves company, I guess.
No, because I've won 5. My team's won 5.
I like how you internalize that.
Yeah.
The
Like,
Bills-
I have. Like, I won 5.
The Bills have lost 5.
You're an
They've
unkind
lost
person.
all of them that they've ever been in.
It's shocking to me that you have any friends whatsoever. I just want
Yeah,
Okay, well, Super
I
Bowl.
like the extremes of human emotion.
that's very fair.
Yeah, this might shock and amaze both of you guys, all of our listeners, but this Sunday, I did not watch the Super Bowl. But instead, we went to the basement, ordered a pizza, and we watched Moana instead.
Moana?
Yeah, with the kids.
Moana 2 or the original
This is
Moana?
the first one.
OG,
First
okay.
one. Yep, there you go. Big football fans over
What type
our
of pizza
house.
did you order, Daryl? I think that's a
We
crucial
got
question.
Little Caesars.
Weak. That's a weak option.
That's terrible.
That's a bad choice.
Wow.
Yeah, there you go.
That's the worst.
Yeah. Papa John's and Domino's.
It's bad.
That's fine.
It's bad, but it's good.
That's not the worst thing to happen on Super Bowl Sunday. Little Caesars beef.
Okay, so Super Bowl, it is known not just for football, not just for music, but primarily for the commercials, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, I hear this a lot. People show up for the commercials.
Some people.
I'm here for the snacks.
Here for the snacks.
Yeah, snacks
all
are
right.
good.
Derek's here for the football.
I'm here for the game, which is why I
Weirdo.
actually mostly hate Super Bowl parties. It's a distraction from the game.
All right, so I've already heard a lot about commercials over this past weekend, and some of our listeners might not have watched the game, and that's okay. I'm there with you guys. But let's talk about commercials for a moment. Has a commercial or has an advertisement ever actually convinced you to purchase the thing that they're selling?
Oh.
Has it ever?
Has it ever shifted your perspective when you watched it?
That's a really great question.
I'm not sure that I could answer that question. I think a lot of the impact of commercial is like the overtime subconscious brewing in my head. I don't know. Oh, here's one.
Yep.
Here's one. Some people may be old enough to remember a Mexican food restaurant chain by the name of Chi-Chi's.
Nope.
They always advertised their Mexican fried ice cream. And I just was intrigued by the idea of fried ice cream. So that got me to try fried ice cream as a child.
How was
at a
it?
place. Wasn't my cup of tea.
Okay.
It disappointed versus what I thought was going to be the case.
Okay.
All right. Perfect. Andrew?
I'm so susceptible to food commercials as well. So like anytime you put like a big luscious burger on a screen in front of me, I all of a sudden want a burger. Or like you see that one slice of pizza with the cheese. It just like I'm gonna want that food. Like I don't think I've ever like purchased like a household item or a vehicle or anything based on that. But for sure food.
Yeah.
That's where like my God is sometimes my stomach.
I remember many years ago, I was in college and I kept on seeing all these ads for, I think it's KFC. They had the double down. Do you guys remember this?
Was that the one with the chicken fillets were the bun?
Yeah. Is that it? Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm with you, baby.
The chicken is the bun.
Yeah.
In the middle is bacon and cheese.
Yeah. I
remember
and
that.
it was the first time I distinctly remember me and my roommate were like, let's
you gotta get
find
that.
the double down.
Yeah.
So we were calling KFCs. Like, do you have this?
Yeah.
And people were answering. They're like, this is like the 10th call today. No, we don't have it. And finally we found a KFC, went out, got it. It was bad. No, it was not good. Let me down.
I don't know if I would have ever gone to Osmos without being
A Raptors
bombarded
fan?
with Osmos ads during Raptors games and finally being like, there's an Osmos over there. I want to try something new. I'll go to Osmos.
Thank you, Fred and Fleet.
And so I think you're right. Like, there are some ads that just grip you, they just grab you. Then other times it is a slow wearing down over time. And then finally you go and you make the purchase. Or it works the other way, where over time you slowly begin to really resent this company. You're like, actually, if I see their ad one more time, I'm canceling my subscription and I'm never going to Rogers again, or whatever it actually is.
Yeah.
It drives us crazy. But this Sunday we're talking about the idea of consumption, of being consumers. And as I said on Sunday, like many ways, this is just the air we breathe, that we live in a world of consumption. And I think that both of you shared some stats. I know, Derek, you did.
Yep.
Andrew, did you share some stats
the
on
one
consumption?
I tried not to live too much in the stat world. I did that a lot the last time I taught. But the one that stuck out to me was Canadian statistic, 36.5 million tons of garbage produced in Canada, which makes us the highest per person producer of garbage in the world.
Interesting.
And I was like,
Why are we number one in that? That's surprising.
Yeah, honestly.
Why is there something about living in Canada that makes it that we produce more trash?
We like to be number one.
Yeah.
We're number one.
You see, I feel like that's the opposite. I don't know if a
I'll
lot
let
of
America
Canadians
take this one.
resonate with that way. Derek, you shared a lot of stats. Anything that really stood out to you?
And I also did share that stat from Andrew. I was shocked that the average, like if you just take the amount of money spent on fast food, every man, woman, and child spends an average of $910 on fast food in a year. Because I just think, you take like a family of 5 like mine, and all of a sudden you're
You're 5K deep.
Yeah, almost 5K on fast food in a
A lot
year.
of double downs.
That's a lot of double downs. A bit of Osmos in there too.
Yeah.
That's where I'd go Osmos over KFC.
Yeah, I shared some of these stats as well, because I know we had our group chat sharing some of these things. I shared some of that and then went the other direction of some things that we don't do.
Okay.
So for instance, last year, more than half of Canadians who are working didn't put anything into retirement savings. So I think it's interesting, not only do we put our money, but where we don't put our money.
Yeah, I shared this stat around charitable contributions, and only 17% of Canadians gave anything to charity in the last year, and of that, the average charitable contribution was $380. That's
A third of what we spend on fast food.
that's the median. The median number. So half of people who gave, half of that 70%, 17% who gave a charitable contribution gave less than 380, and half gave more than 380.
Wow.
But like that's $380. Again, yeah, to the fast food point,
Yeah.
it's almost like a third of what the average Canadian spends on fast food, but only 17% gave a single nickel.
Wow.
So I find stats like this interesting, but when you guys share it, something goes on inside of me. Like part of me finds it fascinating. I'm like, yeah, okay, and I'm trying to like figure this stuff out. And then the other side, like the inner lawyer comes out, right? You try to justify yourself, right? Well, yeah, like the average car payment's $500, but I only pay $400, so I am way above everyone. You start like justifying like how much do we actually spend on these things. I only got 2 double downs last year,
They still make double downs?
I think they do. I don't
I don't know. We're going to Google that.
Let's pull it out of the freezer. I saved them.
They got
A 12-year-old frozen double down, toss her in the air fryer.
So terrible. But like our inner lawyer comes out, right? Like you hear stats of like how much do people spend on the screens. You're like, well, I don't use as much on screens, or I justify like, oh, my job requires a screen. These types of things. So as we consider this idea of consumption is part of the world we breathe, as you guys have wrestled through this, where have you noticed consumption impacting your life? Do you notice that there's something where, like, if left to my own devices, I tend to consume a lot of X?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, the place, and I even said this on Sunday, the place it shows up is in my device usage. Especially when I'm like under stress, I tend to lean into digital distraction more than anything. I'm going to go home and I'm going to watch a TV show or a sport like on TV, or I'm going to get lost in my phone, and that will drag me to an unhealthy place of consumption. And I said this too, like the main point I wanted to make was like Jesus is giving us this way that leads to life, and we often cling to these other things. And I don't know about you, but like when my goal is consumption, I end up just feeling gross at the end of it. Like I don't feel like I found life. I feel like an idiot most of the time. When I'm like, you know better, and you just don't. Yeah, it doesn't produce the life that I'm looking for. But I so often go back to the same stupidity. I don't like that about myself. Or food. Food is one for me. Like I don't think I spend $1,000 a year, but maybe we should track that in 2025, Andrew. Because that would be, if I think about my budget line item, that's the one that'll sneak away on me. When I'm like, oh, I didn't realize I had gone out for lunch 6 times this month or whatever, right? Like those things sort of get ahead of me before I realize they're there.
That's 100% mine. Mine would be food. Same deal. Like not only on like the budget line, because the ease of eating out and trying different things, but also just usually feel like garbage after I've eat out too much. But just food in general, like for me, it's such an easy thing to fall into finding comfort in food. I do find enjoyment in food, but at the same time, like, just don't, right? Like I enjoy the moment, and then maybe it's partially because of my age at this point. I feel more what I eat than I ever, but also like I just feel sluggish or dumpy because I've overate or I've ate stuff that I knew I shouldn't have overindulged in. So that's 100% mine. In fact, if I have a vacation or I go someplace, Amanda will tell you immediately the first thing I want to talk about is the places I ate, the food I ate.
Sure.
Like that is my thing.
Oh, 100%.
It's my jam.
Laura and I will like plan vacations. Like we're gonna go here. Where are we eating? Like that's for sure part of it.
Yeah, for sure. I think both of you mentioned the same thing. I immediately went to screen time, food. Like those are the things that is so easy to. That's where my money goes. That's where my time gets consumed by is being just endlessly doom scrolling online late at night, those types of situations. But Andrew, what you said I found interesting. You mentioned like after eating that or watching, doom scrolling for a while, like you don't feel good. Do you think that's always the case? I'm thinking of someone who might consume other things and they would walk away and not necessarily feel the effect. Do we always feel it immediately?
Yeah, I don't think
is there a lag time sometimes?
I would say for sure there's a lag time sometimes. I think some things are far more pronounced than others. You're gonna feel if you're caught in a loop of pornography, it feels like it's gonna satisfy and then you just feel disgusting afterwards. And so there's two realities. There is like a beating down of your conscience over time where those things don't affect you the same way, or you've said a few times, like it's just the air we breathe that we don't even realize that we're living with that kind of mindset. And sometimes that you don't realize you don't want to go there until you get to the destination that road is going to lead you down, right? For example, like one of the things I didn't get to lean into as much as I wanted to was sort of how that mindset of consumption destroys relationship. I wanted to lean into that a little bit more than I ended up taking time on Sunday, but like a new relationship feels really exciting. And you feel like this connection with this person and it feels like a good thing, but then if the fundamental underpinning of why you're doing that is to commodify this person and make myself feel better, then you end up, and that's why so many people end up breaking up or having divorces or whatever, and they're like, oh, this person doesn't give me what I want, or they've changed. Like even the language that we use around that is
my needs aren't being fulfilled.
Exactly, and we don't go, I really wasn't the husband or boyfriend or whoever that I should have been in that scenario.
Yeah.
It's almost always somebody, maybe both parties, have a commodification mindset, and you end up there. But the first, 3 weeks or 6 months or a few years feels great, but you don't realize it until the termination of that.
Yeah, and I think that's the tricky thing of like when you eat the cheeseburger, you can feel the effects that day. Like, oh, I feel sluggish.
Unless you're 16, you can eat whatever you want.
Yeah. I can. Do a lot of 16-year-olds watch this? Probably not. But I think like there's this caution of the consumption side of it has this lagged effect that goes on for years, maybe decades, where you've consumed a lot of someone who maybe spends all their time on vacation, but not really investing deeply in their relationships around them. Years or decades later realize, oh, I don't have the friendships that I need. I don't have that close church relationship that I really desire, and then you look back, you're like, oh, where have I spent my time? What have I consumed over the past while? And I find like those are the things, like that's what I'm trying to get to in this conversation is I think we immediately pick up on like the obvious things.
Right.
So I don't want the takeaway in this to be, so don't go to KFC. Like
that should be one takeaway.
I mean,
absolutely. Once a year, I make that mistake. I get to the point where I'm like, oh, you know what?
A big crunch.
I smell that greasy chicken, and I think, that bucket of chicken on the way to the beach, that'd be a great thing to buy. And by the time I finished my chicken, I have immediately thought, that's why I haven't bought it for a year.
Yeah. So this is not a health podcast, obviously.
No.
Don't look to me. But this is something we're going deeper into, as I said on Sunday, that consumerism, consumption is actually a spiritual issue. It has deep roots that we need to get into. Good. And so as we address this issue, I just want to go right into this. How has the church been impacted by a consumer mindset? Have you guys seen this?
Unleash Derek.
How long do we have?
And you can speak general, Big C church, North America. You can speak to, if you want, into how you've personally encountered it. Love to hear you guys' thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can look at every aspect. Now, this is true in every culture, that any culture rubs up against the gospel, right? Tim Keller said before, if the gospel is going to be true in a cultural, that is existing outside of culture, then what we should expect to find is that in every single culture, there are areas where the culture is going to come in conflict with the values of the gospel. And I do think consumption in in a way of life where we're called to, where Jesus says, take up your cross and follow me,
Yeah.
consumption is going to run absolutely counter to that reality, because consumption is about my comfort. Consumption is about finding my fulfillment in things apart from Christ. But within the context of the church, I know that we have all encountered people who have come to a church, checked out a church that they're part of, left the church because they said, the church didn't have blank for me or for my kids, or I didn't feel fed. Maybe one of the worst, most annoying things. Now, listen, legitimately, there are churches that, I want you to go to a church that preaches the gospel and the truth of the gospel. But it's actually to think that the church is a buffet that's supposed to feed you all the time is the wrong way of thinking about it in the first place. Like, my ultimate job as a pastor is actually to help you learn how to feed yourself.
Yeah.
So that you're not relying on a once a week meal.
And if you go into the scriptures like 1 Corinthians and Romans 12, both get we are given gifts for the building up of the body.
That's right.
Like the fundamental measure of a church's effectiveness isn't the programs it runs. It's are all the members of the body valued and contributing.
Yeah.
And again, I wish I had said that more starkly on Sunday, that each and every one of us has been given a gift.
Paul's admonishment, he says, each one of you when you come ought to come with something, to bring something. One of the challenges that I gave on Sunday is our heart posture when we come to church, Lord, show me the person that you want me to speak a word of life or encouragement to. Show me the person that I can come alongside and pray for. Show me the way in which I can serve, because we're the church, right? The church is not an organization that is there to provide me religious goods and services.
Well, what if they're not doing my favorite song though?
And I'm not even going to touch it. I said on Sunday I wasn't even going to touch the worship issue. This reality is we do treat the church like we treat a restaurant or a business. And did I get the thing that I wanted and was looking for, which is totally antithetical to what it actually means to be the church, is actually come with something. And the greatest thing for me maybe would be, was I able to contribute into something this week as part of the church?
And I think if you stop thinking at the Sunday morning service level, because if you think about even just like the fundamental structure of how service, like there's a smaller group of people contributing than there are in the room most of the time. And so if we think...
Although even within that, the service is not serve us.
Right.
It's a worship service where as we're singing, we're directing our worship to the Lord. We're coming, we're being shaped so that we can walk out of this place in service to God.
And that's what I was going to say, is that if we think the church is, between 10 and 11:15 or 11:30 for if other people are preaching on a Sunday morning, then you miss the entire point, right? Like, we're meant to be contributing to the building up of the church, but that's not, at a particular location with a group of people. That's us building up the kingdom of God wherever God has placed us. Yeah. And even how we think about what church is fundamentally structured by a consumeristic mindset. Yeah. I'm going to go to this place, like I'm going to the restaurant, I'm going to order the thing, not I am part of this thing called the church and called to give my life away for the building up of the kingdom of God.
So with that, what is our fundamental understanding of grace and discipleship? What is our fundamental understanding need to happen there so that we don't walk away where, because I've often struggled with this, we call it a church service. I don't like that wording. I'd rather it be like the church gathering. Yeah. Service sounds like
you're providing a service.
Like we're providing a service for the people. Is that, I feel like the way you guys have taken the conversation, there's something deeper in grace and discipleship that is important for us to understand for Sunday morning than to make sense.
Unpack that a little bit for me. I'm not sure I'm tracking where the grace piece comes in.
Like grace for the people who believe that already, and how do we move forward in discipleship? Is that the question?
Well, tying in grace, because that's part of the passage that we're studying.
Gotcha.
Is we looked at the idea of grace.
Yeah.
You guys, I preached on that.
That seems like the right thing to do in the church.
Because that was the starting point for the passage, right?
Yep.
Is understanding this idea of grace. So grace, I think, has often been understood in the consuming aspect. We consume the grace. Grace is what Christ gives to us. And so if you're coming at it from that perspective, then Sunday morning, the church gathering is a place of receiving more grace. We're just receiving what Christ has given.
Okay.
But you guys are taking service Sunday morning in a different direction. So I'm trying to connect the dots there because we believe in grace, which is good. But it seems like there's a way to believe a true thing that leads you down the wrong path.
Yeah, I said on Sunday that we were saved. We're not saved by our works, but we are saved to work. Right? So if you only read Ephesians 2:8-9, you get a truth, but you only get half the truth.
Right.
You live half a gospel. And a lot of Christians, I think you're right, especially in our tradition as evangelicals, we have rightly desired, especially if you look at the historical context of the Reformation, where Luther's come, we've rightly desired to help people understand that you aren't saved by your works, that we don't, it's not our merit that in some way achieves our salvation. But Ephesians 10 makes it clear that we weren't just saved from something, we were saved for something. And I think that's the part that I think that's why a lot of evangelical Christians end up feeling pretty hollow. It feels like the Christian life is quite shallow. Because they're actually missing the second half of the gospel. It's like you weren't just saved from something, you're saved into something. You're saved into this bigger purpose and way of living and way of life that is a way of contribution. God has things that He has specifically designed you for, saved you for. There are conversations, relationships, tasks, work that you're going to enter into that the foundation of the earth, God said, I'm going to use them for that. And your life, because of that, has meaning. And I just think if we don't capture that part, like that is grace too. That's God's unmerited favor to me.
Yeah, that He would use even us.
Yeah, that He would choose me to do these things and to do it alongside me. It's not like He needed, it wasn't like He was like, well, I could never do that. I needed Daryl for that. It was like, no, I want to do it with Daryl. Right? Well, like that's so awesome.
Yeah, and this idea of grace, this past week I came across this video from an influencer, and I found it really fascinating. He started talking about that he's a Christian, and he's like, I'm a Christian, I've received grace, I roll. And I'm listening to this, I'm like, there's truth in that, but like it missed something of like, I received grace, now life just goes on, now I can just do my own thing. But like, okay, great that you received grace, but the transformation that happens from there, is it just, I do what I want? That is in the second half.
Right.
No.
We're called to something. And I think that's why what he said rang hollow. Because I'm like, wait, you're not just called to just go on. You know, as Paul addresses this, we don't just receive grace and abundance to go on sinning.
Yeah, Romans
it leads
6.
to real transformation in how we live our lives, where we actually are moving further away from sin, more towards being a sanctified follower of Christ. So we're getting into this idea of contribution. So let's unpack this even more. What does it mean biblically to be a contributor? When it says in Ephesians 2:10, it says, "For we are His workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared ahead of time for us to do." Yeah. Unpack that. When people read this, good works, they've underlined it. What does that actually look like?
So one of the passages that I didn't get to, because I went super long, I was thinking about reading it for my benediction, is in 1 Timothy chapter 6, where Timothy tells those who are rich or Paul tells Timothy, teach those who are rich in this world to be rich in good works. In this idea that, like, it's the very practical way of living out the way of Jesus. It's living into the mission of, we're invited into the kingdom of God, where the rule and reign of God is already getting a taste of, right? He's ruling and reigning here, and we're to provide a taste of that to the world. And we go out and we help to bring those kingdom values into our families, into our neighborhoods, into our workplaces. So I can't say what that's going to look like for every person, but it looks like, seeing the person who is hurting and lonely and inviting them in the community. It looks like seeing the person who is struggling with poverty and making ends meet and going in and showing the grace of Jesus to them by giving them unmerited favor in meeting them in their need, right? It looks like all of this stuff that Jesus gave us a taste of when he was here on this earth.
And I think I would go back to something I said earlier about, like, that God has created those works in advance for us to do. He's prepared those for us, and that he has created us with particular skills and passions and gifts that, they're going to be done better and differently if you're doing them versus me, right? So there's you're called to run the race that God has marked out for you. And I said, like, we've got an unbelievable team at Brant, and if I was running our tech team, it would be an unmitigated disaster. But there's guys who are really gifted and passionate about that. There's unbelievable people serving in kids ministry. There's people who are thinking about how do we engage our community. There's teachers who, like, you don't want me teaching grade 3. Right? But there are people who are called to teach grade 3 and to patiently sit with a bunch of young people before they get those, like, light bulb moments. And there's people who are wired to draw that out in kids. There's lawyers who are decisive and really, like, thorough in their thinking. That God has wired us each individually and given us tasks to do. And I think I can't remember which one of you said, like, that, like, the Christianity can sometimes feel hollow because it's like, I'm saved, now what? Yes, we have, like, and you don't know what to do, look at what you're excited about. Look at what you're really good at, and look how God has wired you and given you passions to go and contribute to build up the kingdom of God. Not just go to church and attend on Sunday. We want you here. We're excited about that. But there's more.
Yeah, and I think that leads me to my next question, which is, how do we find our best yes? So if you're saying we're called to good works, if we're identifying what good works looks like generally and then more specifically, but what does that look like? Is it just fill out that great form that Jen Pent created, where you drop down menus, find your best yes? Like, is that a pathway? Like, what are some pathways in finding what our yes is when we read this of good works? This is what it means to be a follower.
Yeah, I think, first of all, start where you are. One of the other great contributions of Martin Luther in the Reformation was also the tearing down of the divide between the sacred and the secular, and to understand that actually all work can be done for the glory of God. So I don't remember the exact quote, but Luther talked about the fact that even the shoemaker who is making the shoe can do incredibly meaningful work if they're making that shoe with excellency so that God would be glorified and honored in their work. And this is one of the really neat things, is, like, it doesn't matter whether you're cleaning a toilet or you're preaching a sermon. Whatever you do, you can do for the glory of God by saying, I'm just going to give it my very best. And if someone comes and asks me, hey, why do you work so hard on the work that you do? To say, because I have a God who's worthy of my worship in my work, and pointing it back to him. Like, so start where you are. I do think we have to recognize that sometimes in our Western privilege, we are able to ask the question, what's my best yes? Like, most of the world there's a good portion of the world that are just living to get through the next day. and yet their work is no less good if it's done for the purpose of, hey, I want God to be honored through my work. We have the freedom now to sometimes be able to choose some additional things, to use leisure time that we have, or additional time, or to pick and choose what we're going to do.
Yeah.
So in that, I do think you can, I'll say one thing and then I'll turn it over to you guys. Like, ask other people also what you're, don't just like say, I know the thing I like to do. Ask other people to say, what do you think my best contribution would be? What can I add?
Yeah. I think what you said there is helpful for dismantling my question. So thank you for that. Because you're right. The implied in my question is, how do you find your best yes? It's as though you have this organization, the church, and you have all these spots to be filled. And you can pick and choose. My best yes is I can stack chairs. Or your best yes is serving in kids' men. And if I don't show up, then someone else will fill it, right? Because it's a big organization. There's hundreds or thousands of people who can fill and plug into these holes, and I just need to find what's best for me.
Right.
And as you pointed out, that is a position of privilege.
Yeah.
Whereas,
it also puts me as the focus of the serving. Like, actually,
right.
the reason I serve is to get self-fulfillment.
yeah,
But that-
self-actualization.
But that is true, though, right? Like, that's the thing, is that when you serve, you actually do find the joy in life that Jesus offers.
Right, but
if
not,
that's the
but
target.
not if you put yourself as the target.
Right. It's giving your life away for
I'm trying to figure out this tension of like, God has gifted every believer through the power of the Holy Spirit, and yet it's not, we don't actually have an organization. It's more like, we've said this many times, the church is more like a family. So it's not like, hey, we'll just get another volunteer into the family. In the family, it's like, hey, the garbage needs to be taken out. And you're like, that's not my gifting or my calling. And you're like, yeah, but it stinks. And there's only 5 people in the family, so one of you's going to take it out. So it's just trying to shift this mindset away. I think the best yes is helpful in figuring out gifting. But also, I think what you said is helpful in dismantling. We shouldn't just expect other people to jump in. Sometimes we serve
Because there's a
not
need.
in that space of our best yes.
Well, I think one of the things I said towards the end of my message is like, this is what we do. It's because it says, if anyone wants to be my disciples. I landed in Matthew 16, 24 and 25. So that's where I flipped over to Ephesians 2 as well. But like, if anyone wants to be my disciple, like disciples of Jesus live like this because it's what Jesus did. When Jesus is getting ready to go to the cross, he also takes the posture of a servant and washes the feet of the very man who's going to betray him to death, right? And so
Peter's point to him was actually, hey, that's not your best yes.
Yeah.
Jesus, like somebody else should be doing this, not you.
Yeah, and Jesus is saying like, no, this is an example that you should follow as my followers. And so serving and giving our lives away and contributing and being that kind of like Jesus-like posture in the world is the call of every disciple, regardless of your gifting and skill set. You should serve outside of those things as well, which you get into you can get into the weeds on that and say like, it's ideal to serve out of your best yes and your greatest gifting and all those sorts of things. You will give your best contribution there, but sometimes the garbage just needs to go out.
Yeah.
Sometimes the right question to ask in any situation is what needs to be done, and then do the thing that needs to be done. Like, I think that's a good starting point for all of us to start with, is what needs to be done here in order for, we say we're about making disciples of Jesus who love God, love others, and serve the world.
Yeah.
Okay, so what needs to be done right now to love God well and to love people well?
Yeah, it makes me think of, there's a video game I've played where when you click on one of the characters, they all have like catchphrases, and the one says, what needs doing?
Yeah.
And you go send him, he's gonna go build, something. And like and I kind of joke around in the house sometimes, so I just say to Steph, I'm like, what needs doing? Like what, garbage, take the kids somewhere, like what needs doing? And honestly, just trying to have this posture of like, I don't care what it is, at the time, what needs to happen around here to make the household flourish.
Think about even how that then shifts. Okay, even moving into the thing that best fits you, right?
Yeah.
So all of the sudden, I am saying, like I'm doing this thing. Maybe I'm doing kids ministry with kindergarten kids because it needs to be done. But out of love for those kids, I recognize, hey, I probably am not the best person long term. So we're going to try and find somebody who will
gifted.
be even better and gifted, not as much even for the sake of them, although they will be blessed through it, but for the sake of the kids that are being served, right? But in the moment, having somebody who could serve those kids is better than having nobody who could serve those kids.
I think sometimes we hide behind gifting a little bit too much in the area of, so I've had people say to me like wow, Daryl, like you're really good at blank.
Yeah.
And I have to correct them, like I work incredibly hard. I wish I had gifting in that area. And if someone wants to take it from me, have at it. Because I'm like, hey, and then there's other areas where like, it's a breeze. And that's where like you find these giftings. But I think sometimes we hide behind, this took more effort, so I'm not gonna do it. But sometimes, and again, it goes back to that mentality of what needs doing for God's kingdom. And it's always a mixture of that, right?
Yep.
Like I heard someone put it this way, like even in like pastoral ministry, like there's the ministry side that you enjoy. Both of you are gonna have things like you just love meeting with people or writing a sermon. And then there's the side that we can just call work. Where it's like, I've yet to meet a pastor who genuinely loves answering emails.
Yeah.
Like just tends not to happen. But that's just the work side, right? Like who likes to write a policy? Maybe Kirk, but
It's funny because it's
No,
true.
it's not. There's a reason Kirk uses AI to help him write policy.
Oh, you just expose our guy?
oh man. But
It's not even Kirk loves that.
No, not even Kirk.
he would say like that's the work side,
Yeah.
And both have to happen. But we don't avoid the work side just because it's less fun than the. I joke with people. All my job is meeting up with people in the coffee shop. That's not entirely true. I wish it was.
Right.
That would be amazing. There's the work side. So, but Derek, you in your message, I know you got to talking about the idea of purpose.
Yeah.
And I want to address this, and then we're going to land the plane. For anyone who's listening to this and hearing, okay, we're called to do what is good. We're called to contribute into God's kingdom. Does that mean that my life only has purpose if I'm working and if I'm serving? So if anyone is feeling that tension right now, love for you guys to address that.
Yeah.
How would you walk them through that feeling?
Well, this is one of the things I unpacked in verse 10 of Ephesians 2 is it says, you are God's workmanship. And depending on the translation you're using, it could be translated, you are God's masterpiece. Like you are of incredible value to God before you get to the good works.
Right.
You are God's workmanship created in Christ Jesus to do good works. But the good works is not what makes you valuable to Him. What makes you valuable to Him is you're created in God's image. What makes you valuable to Him is that Jesus Christ died to redeem you, to purchase you. This is how valuable you are. He paid the greatest price anybody could ever pay for you. So rooting your work, knowing this first, helps you to not get into this situation where you start judging your value by what you produce. And then you're able to work out of that reality and into those good works. One of the things I'm sure that we've all seen, and feel free to chime in on this, is that like people in ministry and even lay people can get caught up in this idea that I only matter if I do quote unquote big things for God.
Yeah.
Right? No, God will determine how He uses those things. Just be obedient.
Yeah.
Like just do the things that He's asked you to do. He hasn't asked you to do big things for Him. He's just said, would you do the things I ask you to do?
Right.
And I'll determine the scope of how big or small that is. But none of that determines your value. No one is showing up on the day we meet God. He's not going to say, well done, my good and guy who did big things for me servant.
Right.
The thing that we all should hope to hear is, well done, my good and faithful servant. Did you do what I asked you to do? Because I was the one who was working out the whole plan. I knew the piece you were playing, and you had a piece to play that piece because it's how it fits into the whole plan.
Yeah, if you're thinking through the idea of purpose, I think to sort of piggyback on that idea, what I wanted to say was like, I think in a pursuit of purpose, sometimes we look past what's right in front of us, right?
Yeah.
If you're the parent at home changing diapers, that is sacred work. If you are the shoemaker or the factory line worker, like God's put you there for a reason. The sovereign hand of God, it wasn't absent in those realities, and purpose almost takes on this life of its own, where it needs to be this gargantuan thing and be really clear and be what drives your life. But most of us we just get that day, and whatever God's given you that day. One of the things we haven't said that I think is really important is like, be prayerful and attentive and like follow the voice of the Spirit. And so maybe it's just having a conversation with your kid on the stairs instead of losing your mind on them, just really using that as an opportunity to disciple them. Or somebody who walks into the cubicle beside you and sits down and you notice they're having a hard day. Like maybe that's the purpose God put in your path for that day. That's the good work that He prepared in advance for you to do. Yeah. It doesn't need to be spectacular and have lights around it. Yeah. Just faithfully walk in whatever He's prepared for you to do that day, one step in front of the other.
Yeah. Well, I think we should end there. And hopefully this conversation has been helpful for everyone who is watching, those who are listening. And I really hope that this sparks and leads us to that next step, that we don't just listen to this and think about, contributing is good, it's a good idea, but actually, hopefully this helps shape where we're already serving and contributing in our various areas of life, and will also lead just to that next step of what that will look like. If you need encouragement in that next step, encourage our listeners to reach out to one of the pastors here, one of the elders. Love to help guide you in that process as we walk in faithfulness of what God is calling us to. Thanks for joining us today.